Welcome to WordUp, a mini segment designed to serve up an extra dose of word while enlightening and freeing your mind. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. Romans 1:12. In today's WordUp, we take a closer look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. Sure, we're all familiar with the story. As a kid, we could win the Good Samaritan Award at school if we showed care and concern for our peers. Most of us learned just the surface parts of that parable because that's what we were told to focus on. But there are so many questions about this parable that were left unanswered. Like, who is the Samaritan? Why did the other guy need help? What about those guys that passed by the hurt man? We are about to answer all those questions and more. To refresh the details for yourself, the parable can be found in Luke 10:25 through 37. Again, the parable can be found in the book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, we find the practice of loving your neighbor as yourself from our first episode of DYUHWW and Die Weg Reclusion, this episode of DYUHWW, all wrapped up in one intriguing story. Jesus tells this parable because one of the hecklers in the crowd he's speaking to decides to try and put Jesus to the test. Dude is like, I'm a fancy lawyer guy, and I'm smart and intelligent and important.
Aren't you sharp attack? You some type of law or something, somebody important or something.
So, tell me, Jesus, how do I inherit eternal life? Now, of course, Jesus already knew what this dude was getting at. He's omniscient. Can't trick him. So, Jesus is like, well, fancy lawyer guy, you're intelligent. What does the law say? How do you interpret it? Fancy lawyer guy, thinking he's about to impress somebody with his knowledge, regurgitates the law word for word like, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is like, you've got it. You're correct, fancy lawyer guy. Do that and you get eternal life. But fancy lawyer guy couldn't let it go. We all know folks that don't know when to stop. But this guy, he's like, well, Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth. You know, he put a little stank when he said Nazareth because people were already talking about how nothing good ever came out of Nazareth. So he was like, well, Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth, who is my neighbor then? Jesus, so unimpressed with this dude, is like,
You so lame.
Look here, fancy lawyer guy. Since you're so smart, riddle me this. And proceeds to tell him the story of the man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is the same Jericho where the city walls fell because God told them to. It was located in the Jordan Valley, about 17 miles east of Jerusalem, in the area known as the West Bank today. Today, it's known as Hill of the Sultan. The trip itself was dangerous. No paved roads and automobiles like we have today. This journey more than likely would have been made on donkey or on foot in the hot desert sands and treacherous steep terrain, since Jerusalem is about 2,500 feet above sea level and Jericho is about 846 feet below sea level. That's right, below, under the surface of the sea. Plus, Bad guys found this to be a great route to hit a few licks. In fact, that's what happened to the traveler. He's robbed and beaten badly, left for dead in a ditch on the side of the rocky, dusty, unpaved road. And here's where the story gets interesting. A priest, also on his way to Jericho, sees the balled up heap of man and quickly decides he does not want to get involved. Whatever is going on with that man, the priest decides it's none of his business. To state the obvious, it's weird that a priest of God would think that way, but okay. After the priest, a Levite approaches the severely injured man, takes one look and decides he wants to be off the road before dark, and if he stops, it could take too long, or the robbers could come back. So he too crosses the street and keeps it moving to Jericho. You may not be familiar with the Levites. The Levites are a chosen branch of the 12 tribes of Israel, set apart to serve God only in the tabernacle and later in the temple. They were considered the holiest of men. Unfortunately, some think holiness can exist separate from humaneness. Guess some don't know how holy works. Back to the story. Just as the man is about to lose consciousness, a Samaritan approaches, who is also going to Jericho. We know the Samaritan helps the beaten man, so let's talk about the significance of his Samaritan ethnicity. The other men in this story are Jewish, the priest, the Levite, and the robbed and beaten man, though I'm not sure about the robbers. Anyway, due to the Assyrian conquest of Israel in about 722 BC, interracial marriages between the remaining Jewish population and immigrant implants in the region known as Samaria, Samaritans were created. The traveler is a descendant of those Samaritans. Samaria was known for idolatry and all sorts of pagan practices. The mixed Jews were hated by the non-mixed Jews, partly because of their religious practices. Sound familiar? This stuff has been going on forever, y'all. It's important to note that the Samaritan is helping a man that would probably look down on him and not be caught talking to him in public if he were healthy. The Samaritan doesn't just help the fellow to his feet. He puts him on his ride, a donkey but still, and takes him to a hotel where he pays for his care and recuperation with a promise to pay any additional fees when he returns from Jericho. That's loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. It's also diversity. The men are different ethnicities. It's equity. The Samaritan provided accommodations for the traveler who could not provide for himself. And it's inclusion. He takes the traveler to a hotel to recoup. He doesn't leave him on the side of the road alone. Jesus finishes the story and then asks Fancy Lawyer Guy which of these men was a neighbor to the man that was robbed and beaten. And Fancy Lawyer Guy, reduced to a more appropriate level of humility, answers reluctantly, the one who helped him. And Jesus is like, huh? Speak up there, Sonny. I can't hear you. Just kidding. Jesus is like, now you really understand, not just know the law. Go and practice the same. There are several lessons we can learn from this parable. Here are a few. 1. You can't outsmart Jesus. You cannot do it. He is omniscient. He knows everything already, past, present, and future. Number 2, neighbors help each other. You want to know who your neighbor is? It's the person you're helping. Number 3, help may come from unlikely sources. Don't look down on the help just because it doesn't look like the help you think it should. To put it all together and relate it back to our episode topic, direct reclusion, this parable made it into the book of Luke because of the racial dynamics between the Jews and the Samaritans. On a normal day, neither group would have thought twice about helping the other. We read about such an encounter when Jesus visits with a woman at a well in Samaria. You can find that story in the book of John, chapter 4, in the New Testament. This extreme example of how being a neighbor works completely rendered the fancy lawyer guy's question of who is my neighbor null and void, because our neighbor is who we act neighborly to. It's not who can do something for us. Our neighbors are not only the people in our communities, our state, or our country. Everyone is our neighbor. And DE&I applies to all of our neighbors. And DE&I is about making accommodations and showing consideration for our neighbors so that they have access to services and goods they would otherwise not be able to attain. Today, tribe, try being a neighbor to someone different from you. Imagine you are of a different ethnicity, or you practice a different religion. Perhaps you can imagine you've been victimized or injured by others. Or maybe you can imagine being from a distant country with different laws and a different culture. I'm guessing no matter what you picture in your mind, you still want to be treated neighborly. Love your neighbor as yourself. Hashtag Galatians 5:14. Dear Mr. Christian, word up.